How does the food you eat contribute to your health? Do supplements help prevent disease? For the past 25 years, the Linus Pauling Institute has served as a world-renowned research center at Oregon State University. Our mission is to promote optimal health through cutting-edge nutrition research and trusted public outreach. We use a synergistic strategy, connecting several scientific fields to bring a better understanding to dietary components and the role that they play in obtaining optimal health. We provide that information to the world, allowing people everywhere to live longer, better lives. Welcome to the Linus Pauling Institute's webinar series.
Hello, everyone. This is Beyond the Common Cold, Emerging Roles of Vitamin C in Health. My name is Dr. Alexander Michels, and I am a Research Associate and Communications Officer here at the Linus Pauling Institute. I have been involved in vitamin C research for over 20 years, and so it's a great pleasure that I welcome everyone to this, the Linus Pauling Institute's first webinar of the year of 2022 on vitamin C. This webinar is a special one in our series for two reasons. First off, of course, this is featuring vitamin C, and it's a topic near and dear to the heart of the Linus Pauling Institute. And second, this is Linus Pauling Day. February 28th is Linus Pauling's birthday, and so we would have been honoring Dr. Pauling's 121st birthday today. Happy birthday, Dr. Pauling. And this webinar is part of the way of how we honor the legacy of Dr. Pauling and his impact on the world. Today, we will have the opportunity to hear from two world-renowned experts on vitamin C. But before we get to that, I would like to invite Dr. Emily Ho, my co-moderator for today's event, and more importantly, the director of the Linus Pauling Institute, to come on and give an opening remark.
Hi, everyone. Happy birthday, Linus Pauling. Welcome to our Linus Pauling Day webinar for today. As Alex mentioned, my name is Emily Ho, and I'm the director of the Linus Pauling Institute. Linus Pauling Day is really a special time for the Institute and Oregon State University. At this time, we really take a look back at the amazing life and work of Dr. Pauling and celebrate our connection to his lasting legacy. It's not only a time to honor his brilliance as a scientist, but also in the many ways he attempted to change the world and really make a big impact. And there's no better way to honor the Linus Pauling legacy by diving into one of his favorite topics, vitamin C. After all, it was the work of Dr. Pauling on vitamin C that really solidified the theories around this concept of orthomolecular medicine, which today has evolved into this idea of precision nutrition, where this concept of the right molecule at the right dose at the right time is really needed to help people live longer and better lives. We know that the topic of vitamin C is really a favorite of many of you, our followers of the Institute, as evident by the number of people who registered and joined us today. We have over 1,500 people that registered for this webinar, and many more will watch the video as well. So it just goes to show you the longevity and the passion Dr. Pauling's work has had over many, many years. I could go on, but I think it's time to go to our experts and our speakers. So I'm going to throw it back to Alex to give us a little bit more rundown of what's going to be happening.
Okay, thank you, Emily. I'm going to bring on our speakers in just a moment, but they're going to both give a short presentation, kind of an introduction to their work, and then we're going to open up to a Q&A session. So it's going to be presentations, then Q&A session, and we're going to wrap up today around noon. But first, before I get to the presentations and the introductions, I'd like to tell you about the Q&A, how we're handling the Q&A for this webinar. There's a Q&A button here on Zoom, so if you have any questions at all for the speakers or just in general questions, you can put them in the Q&A tab. We will be monitoring the Q&A throughout the webinar today. We will not be monitoring the chat for questions, so please put them in the Q&A tab, any questions that you might have. And you can do this at any time. It doesn't matter if someone's speaking, just whenever it pops into your head, Obviously, the Q&A session is going to be the largest part of our webinar today. So if a question brings up another question in your mind, go ahead and type it in there at any time. We are going to save all the questions that are entered, and if we don't get to them today, we'll get to them sometime in the future. And Dr. Ho and I will be taking turns today answering or asking questions of our speakers. Okay, so let's get to it. Our first speaker today is Dr. Jeannie Drisco. She has been part of the University of Kansas Health System faculty for more than 20 years, where she founded the KU Integrative Medicine Program. Although she stepped back as the director of the KU Integrative Medicine Program in clinic in 2018, she still continues to be involved in the research, in integrative medicine research. You might remember Dr. Drisco from our last Linus Pauling Day webinar in 2021, where she was part of the 4-member panel giving presentations and answering questions just like she is today. And she was gracious enough to come back for 2022. So let's have her start off with an overview of her work.
Hi, this is Jeannie Drisco joining you for the Oregon State University Linus Pauling Institute's Linus Pauling Day 2022. I am Professor Emeritus at the University of Kansas Medical Center and have conducted translational research for over 20 years. Most of the projects I have been involved in are studies looking at intravenous vitamin C. Without Linus Pauling, I would have not been on this path. What many people, including some doctors, do not know is that there is a difference between oral vitamin C and intravenous vitamin C. Oral vitamin C is a vitamin with many important properties in the human body. Intravenous vitamin C, however, becomes a drug when injected into the body and has very important properties that enable it to kill viruses, bacteria, cancer cells, and other biological processes that cannot be done with oral vitamin C alone. And the dose of the injected vitamin C is also important, with a threshold of around 15 grams and higher to produce this effect. Think of your oral vitamin C dose of about 0.5 gram to 1 gram per serving. This is important when compared to 15 grams, 25 grams, or even 100 grams of the intravenous vitamin C. You could not take this dose by mouth because the GI tract just flushes it out of the body in the stool. But injecting it gets it by this gut effect and puts it right in the bloodstream where it flows around in the body water, doing its magic before it gets washed out of the body by the kidneys. The wonderful effects of intravenous vitamin C have been known for many years. Our team showed it was widely used and appeared to be very safe. The practitioners that used it for cancer, fatigue, sepsis, infection, cardiovascular disease, and post-viral syndromes. Our research has been mostly in the area of cancer treatment, but also in other areas. I have worked closely with Dr. Chen. She does the basic science research, and I manage the clinical or patient research. And then we combine together, and this is known as translational research. To become an accepted therapy by conventional medicine, there must be a high level of research, and this research has to be reproduced by other researchers confirming the positive findings. The research pyramid for intravenous vitamin C is growing. Intravenous vitamin C has had an uphill battle. In the 1970s, Dr. Pauling recognized that intravenous vitamin C could play a role in cancer treatment, and he and Dr. Ewan Cameron published case reports of their treatment successes. However, when Dr. Pauling directed the National Institutes of Health to fund cancer studies, the resulting trials were unsuccessful. They said that vitamin C had no benefit in the treatment of cancer. So the conventional doctors were told that there was no benefit in using vitamin C for cancer therapy and it should be discarded. However, the NIH-funded studies did not use intravenous vitamin C like Dr. Pauling and Dr. Cameron. They only used oral doses of vitamin C, and this is a huge missed opportunity. The conventional doctors were also told that intravenous vitamin C caused kidney stones, kidney damage, increased bleeding, and other problems. So it became one of those therapies that was set aside for many years. However, intravenous vitamin C did not go away completely. Dr. Pauling, Dr. Abram Hoffer, Dr. Hugh Reardon, Dr. Mark Levine, and many others continued the treatment, research, and publications that allowed us to continue. Recently, we did what is called a pharmacokinetic study, looking at what happens in the body when doses from 1 gram all the way up to 100 grams were injected in healthy adults and in cancer patients. We have just submitted the paper for publication, so I cannot tell you a lot of the details, but it is all right to say it is very safe, and we did not find kidney damage, kidney stones, increased bleeding, and other issues of concern, even up to the 100-gram dose. And our research and others have shown a role for intravenous vitamin C in cancer and infections. So with a healthy diet, physical activity, no smoking, and oral vitamins and minerals as needed, you will reduce the risk for the need of treating yourself with drug therapy like intravenous vitamin C. But if you need intravenous vitamin C, it will be there for you, and you can be assured of its safety. And I'd like to do a special shout out and thank you to Dr. Linus Pauling.
Okay, thank you for that introduction, Jeannie. Now I'm going to bring on Chen. Our next speaker, Dr. Chen is also from the University of Kansas Medical Center, but before coming to Kansas, she worked with Dr. Mark Levine, who you just heard about a moment ago, but not to give too much away because Dr. Chen will talk about this in more detail, but she did some groundbreaking work with Mark Levine at the National Institutes of Health, NIH, looking at the pharmacokinetic properties of vitamin C, and this kind of led to a rebirth of the whole intravenous vitamin C movement. After leaving the NIH, Dr. Chen has been continuing to work on the intravenous vitamin C model in her own laboratory in Kansas, which we'll explain more her work in cancer in just a moment. And she's been working in clinical and preclinical models to help us expand our knowledge of how intravenous vitamin C works. It's a pleasure to have her today for this webinar, and I'd like to bring her on to give an introduction to her work.
Hello. It is a great pleasure to join you from the Linus Pauling Institute on the Linus Pauling Day 2022. My name is Chen. I am an associate professor at the University of Kansas Medical Center. My research focuses on basic and translational research in cancer biology. One of the most exciting research journeys I have had is the study in high-dose intravenous vitamin C in cancer treatment. The legacy comes from Dr. Linus Pauling himself. In the 1970s, Dr. Pauling and his collaborators treated terminal cancer patients with 10 grams of vitamin C and found prolonged survival and improved quality of life. However, formal clinical trials in Mayo Clinic did not repeat his results, but a study in Japan did repeat his results. It turned out that the two different types of studies used totally different methods. Dr. Pauling used 10 grams a day by intravenous infusion, followed by oral doses, but the Mayo clinical trials used 10 grams only orally. This difference was first noted by an NIH investigator, Dr. Mark Levine. As illustrated here, and as Dr. Drisco just emphasized, oral vitamin C is a vitamin, given blood concentrations barely above 100 micromolar, while intravenous vitamin C gives pharmacological peaks hundreds of times higher, which mimic a drug. And this high dose of intravenous vitamin C kills cancer cells. Showing you here as an example, these were mice bearing pancreatic cancer. The 4 groups were treated with saline, showing you on the top line, a standard chemotherapeutic drug, gemcitabine, which is the first-line chemotherapy for pancreatic cancer patients, showing you on the second line. Injected ascorbate, high dose, showing you as the third line. At the bottom line, showing you the ascorbate, that means vitamin C, and gemcitabine co-treatment. So these mice were imaged at day 0, which is the start of the treatment, the beginning of the treatment, then at day 13 and day 35. You can clearly see that the vitamin C group had much less tumor burden, either from the imaging and from the curves down here. This is a quantification of the image. And this group has the least metastatic lesion, as shown you here on the right bottom corner figure there. While gemcitabine did not do much to this tumor. Now, many laboratories all over the world have validated the anti-tumor effects of high-dose injectable vitamin C in many types of animal cancer models. These bench-side findings were then taken back to clinical testing. Our group did a clinical trial in ovarian cancer patients, where 2 groups of patients were included. One group was on standard chemotherapy, showing you here CP plus Pax, means carboplatin, and paclitaxel co-treatment. And the other group had the chemotherapy plus intravenous vitamin C. The results here show you that the addition of intravenous vitamin C significantly reduced chemo-associated toxicities. And this reduction of toxicity can be seen in every categories that was evaluated. Although this trial was too small to statistically evaluate the efficacy of vitamin C, we found that the vitamin C-treated group had 16 more months than the chemo-only group before their tumor came back. Because many doctors concerned that vitamin C may interfere with chemotherapy, we particularly evaluated how the drugs behave inside patients when they were co-administered. This data here is in the pancreatic cancer patients treated with 75 grams to 125 grams per infusion of vitamin C and gemcitabine on the same day. It simply shows that intravenous vitamin C did not interrupt the behavior of gemcitabine inside the patient body. In addition, these co-treated patients had better survival benefit compared to reported data on patients with the same tumor and on the first-line chemotherapy only. Now, I have to point out that these data are not statistically significant because these trials have too few patients to reach that point. Larger, more definitive clinical trials are still needed. With that said, here I want to show you one particular case. This patient was diagnosed with stage 4 metastatic pancreatic cancer. The initial PET-CT scan showing you here the primary tumor in the pancreas, as the upper panel shows you, and there's numerous liver lesions, liver metastatic lesions showing you as the lower panel. Now, usually the lifespan of stage 4 pancreatic cancer is 5 months to a year. The patient opted out of chemotherapy, fully understanding the natural process of the disease. He selected high-dose intravenous vitamin C as his only treatment, and he received 75 to 125 grams of intravenous vitamin C 2 to 3 times a week. This is 8 months later. The liver lesions shrank. And then a year later, the primary tumor got smaller and less active, and many of the liver lesions are gone, vanished. 1.5 year, the primary tumor still smaller and even less active, and the liver lesion were gone. Liver lesions were gone. Livers was tumor-free. 2.5 year and 3.5 years, the liver was still tumor-free and the primary tumor stabilized. It did not grow larger. The patient lived much longer than the usual lifespan expectation. With that, I would like to summarize my presentation. High-dose intravenous vitamin C is safe, well tolerated, at least up to 125 grams, and it is potentially effective in treating cancers. It reduces chemo-associated toxicity. It does not interfere with many commonly used chemo drugs. There have been many small-scale trials, most of them showing benefit, but still large clinical trials are needed to definitely define the efficacy of vitamin C. The intravenous vitamin C has multiple mechanisms fighting against cancer, which I do not have time to share with you today. These multiple working mechanisms provide opportunities for combination treatment with standard chemotherapeutic care in hope for synergistic effect. With that, thank you very much for your attention.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Chen. We're about to move on to our Q&A section, and I see that people have already been starting to put their questions into the Q&A tab, exactly where they're supposed to be. But just a fair warning, we already have a lot of questions available. There were almost 300 questions submitted before this event started. So you'll have to forgive us if we don't get to every question posted here.
Even if we don't get to your question, we have lots of resources available for you as well. Just a reminder, the Linus Pauling Institute also has the Micronutrient Information Center, which has a huge amount of information about many vitamins, minerals, and phytochemicals, and especially as a great section on vitamin C. Please check that out. You can access the link here, and I'll have someone, Dr. Drake, who manages the Micronutrient Information Center, put the link into the chat right now for you all.
We've also answered a lot of these questions because we've got a huge amount of questions in our last vitamin C webinar, and we compiled a document called the 100 Questions About Vitamin C, and we just got that together in honor of this event, and we're going to send that to everyone who registered for the webinar today. So you can not only look at the last year's webinar and see the answers that were given live, but additional questions will be sent off in a document, and we're also going to have that on our webpage in the future.
So just a reminder, if you have questions for us right now, to use the Q&A button that's below, and we're going to work really hard to answer your questions. And if we don't get to them, you can always reach out to the Institute by email or on the phone. So again, if you don't get your answers right away through these resources, just send them in separately. Just before we get to the question and answer with our experts, I also want to make sure you knew that if you appreciate these resources available to you by the Institute, to please consider a donation. These outreach programs, like this webinar that you're attending, the Micronutrient Information Center, are all primarily funded by the generosity of donors like you. So without your support, we couldn't bring this fantastic programming to you. Thank you for all that have supported in the past. We have a mission to make sure our science gets out to the general public, and that we can offer you science-backed information and connect you with world-renowned experts, not only within the Institute, but researchers like Dr. Drisco and Chen here with you as well. So if you'd like to consider a gift, you can use the link that's also in the chat, and we'll be emailing out the resources, links to this talk, and links to give for everyone who's registered here today. All right. Okay. Shall we get on to the business?
Yeah, we're going to get on to the Q&A now. Jeannie and Kay, would you turn your cameras on? And as you do that, I'm going to go on to the ground rules here. The Linus Pauling Institute is not a medical institution. We don't really often field medical questions. If you have a personal medical question, we ask that you maybe ask the question in a more broad sense, because we cannot tackle these very specific medical issues. We're not physical MDs, or at least we are not MDs. We'll try to answer any general questions that we can, but actually, I'll just go ahead and start. I think the first question that I saw come in was about the composition of IV vitamin C, like the IV bags that you give. Jeannie, do you want to handle that one?
I'll jump right in on that.
What's in the bag?
Thank you. Well, when we buy the vitamin C from a pharmacy that makes it as a injectable drug, we know that in the bottle, they have extracted that ascorbic acid or that vitamin C into a very pure compound. So there's been a medical myth, and I'm going to digress a minute before I start mixing it. There's been a medical myth that the vitamin C, if it's made from corn, will be toxic to some people. But the fact of the matter is, if the product is well made in a pharmaceutical type of an environment, that ascorbic acid is pure, and that's all that you're going to find in that bottle. And that being said, we then have what we call a carrier fluid, and that's the bag of fluid that we get also from a pharmacy. And depending on the amount of vitamin C, it can be anything from lactated ringers all the way up to sterile water. And the reason that you have to know what kind of carrier fluid to use is because of something called osmolality. But that's probably a bit more for this conversation than need be. And then some people add magnesium in to it. We do with our cancer patients, because it makes the vein accept the infusion better. The vein doesn't go into spasm. And we always make sure that the pH of that solution is not too acidic. So if need be, we might add a little sodium bicarb. So these are things that people are trained and learn how to do. And so if you're going to get intravenous vitamin C, you have to make sure that the person that's giving it understands all of these things.
I'm going to ask a quick follow-up on that one. Where is your target pH for that solution?
Well, the body likes to have things around. It can be anywhere from 5 to 7.
Okay.
And sometimes when we tested some of the bottles of vitamin C that we obtained, we found that sometimes the pH was very low, even though the bottle of vitamin C said that it was buffered, or it was supposed to be adequate to inject into the body. So everybody really needs to make sure that for the practitioners that are doing it, they need to make sure they know where they're getting their vitamin C, they know how it's manufactured, and what the pH is.
And the reason I asked that question is, of course, if you get the pH gets too high, I mean, not only does that cause problems with the body, but it causes problems with the stability of vitamin C. But that's way above like what we would normally inject into someone's body. Emily?
Yeah, my next
question. That's important, actually.
Yep.
Next question is a bit of a follow-up, but for either Dr. Chen or Dr. Drisco. You mentioned in terms of the importance of the practitioner having the right stuff and doing the right protocol. Where are we in terms of standardization of the protocol? Is there consistency across some of the studies that Dr. Chen, you just described? It seems like to ensure we get the most efficacious dose, that having some standardization would be a good thing.
A lot of clinical studies use as high as, for cancer, from 50 grams to 100 and 125 grams. Jeannie and I used to monitor the blood level and to making sure a therapeutic level is reached, which is about 350 milligram per deciliter, which roughly equal 20 millimolar in the bloodstream. That's the peak plasma concentration we aim. A lot of other studies many of them don't monitor the blood concentration that much, and then that's actually the good question. There's a lack of a unified protocol of how it's been dosed and how fast and how often and how long. That's actually part of the problem that we see variations in the results of those studies. Good question.
More work to be done.
Anything to add?
No, that is very important because there's a difference that the way that people in the clinic, practitioners in the clinic, give vitamin C for infection, let's say, or fatigue. They may add a lot of other things like B vitamins and calcium and so on and so forth. But for our cancer patients, we're finding that when you add a lot of things to the bag, that the effectiveness of the vitamin C as a pro-oxidant may be reduced, particularly when the B vitamins are added. So that's a concern we've had, and we've tried to educate the best we can.
Yeah, there could be some interesting chemistry happening in the bag.
Yes, exactly.
As a kind of a follow-up to that, I mean, when we're talking about cancer, we're talking about a different goal usually for intravenous vitamin C than we're talking about, say, sepsis. Do you want to comment on the different, amounts given for each of those trials?
Well, Dr. Fowler had done some preliminary work. He's at Virginia Commonwealth University, and he's our sepsis go-to person. He did a lot of preliminary work before he's used it in patients, and he felt like a lower dose, around 12 grams, would be safe. And he was giving that about 12 to 15 grams, maybe once or twice a day in his septic patients. If you use any less than that, if you use, let's say, 5 grams or 6 grams, you may not be getting that oxidative burst that's going to kill the bacteria or the virus in the body. So we think that a higher dose is helpful. Now, the reason that you may not want to give 50 grams to a septic patient is that there may be a lot of cytokine storm, a lot of inflammatory response from a very high dose. That hasn't been determined yet. So we're a little cautious when it comes to septic patients.
I see. Yeah. I mean, but sepsis, of course, is a condition where vitamin C is being depleted very rapidly.
Absolutely.
So it's another, kind of what Kay just said about monitoring your vitamin C levels, as you're infusing. You got to understand what's going on.
Absolutely.
I'm going to do a follow-up question to the one that I asked before about what's in the bag. There's another question about the difference, or not the differences, but was the vitamin C used natural versus synthetic? I know it's a typical question that we get as vitamin C researchers. Do you want to try to tackle that one?
You want to do that, Kay, or do you want me to take it?
From my point of view, as long as the compound is pure, like Jeannie mentioned, they're the same. Either they are extracted from natural source or they are synthesized. For my own use, when I use in animals, I use the synthetic ones. So as long as it's pure, I think that's the key.
And the molecules are exactly the same.
Yep. Yeah, it's a lot in the lines of common vitamin C myths.
I want to bring back the narrative back to the cancer piece. Can you talk a little bit about use of vitamin C in prevention of cancer versus treatment? And in particular, vitamin C by itself or vitamin C together with some of the other more traditional chemotherapies? Is there evidence that it can be used as an adjuvant, for example?
Well, I'll address the prevention question first. Everything, you know, it's, as I said in the introduction, everything you do in life adds up, and you've got to have a healthy diet. The Linus Pauling Resource Center is wonderful. It'll tell you about a multitude of supplements that can be used and used in synergy with a good diet. And if you don't have lifestyle problems like smoking or excess alcohol intake, then generally that can add up to a pretty healthy, long life. So just throwing in IV vitamin C as a cancer preventative, I don't, I mean, what would you follow? Would you follow, you know, for 20 years, would you follow a blood level? Would you follow markers? There's really nothing to follow. So I think that the best way is just take care of every aspect of your life. And then if you need it, if you need the IV vitamin C as a therapy, then add it.
Yeah, there's a long history of using vitamin C, arguing vitamin C as a prevention measure for cancer. Usually you're talking about oral supplement of vitamin C. There are actually been quite a few, many trials, either epidemiologic studies, there are tons of them. And then I think majority, I saw some meta-analysis or review on those trials. Majority of them do show a protective effect if you take plenty of vitamin C supplements versus the ones who don't, or you eat plenty of fruits and vegetables versus the ones who don't. Those are the epidemiologic evidence there, which is supportive for the prevention effect of cancer of vitamin C. However, there are also intervention studies, pretty big trials, like 15,000 patients trials. Half of them are placebo, half of them are vitamin C pills. Those are more, the results are more controversial. Some, many of them don't find the follow for markers of oxidation of their vitamin C, and then plus like vitamin E and other antioxidants also combined using in those trials. The follow markers of oxidation and then clinical benefit, cancer incidence, they don't really find the difference there. But if they look like further into the data, some of the studies do find a protective against cancer incidence in men versus women. But the authors think, the investigators there think it's probably because of a higher oxidative status in men in the baseline to begin with. So the antioxidants has more benefit there. That's some of the study. And then there is another study, also phase 3, I think, using vitamin C, vitamin E, and some other antioxidant. They do find reduced recurrence incidence of cancer in those who take the antioxidant.
Interesting.
Traditional chemotherapies as well.
Say it again, Emily, please.
If there's any power of vitamin C in concert with other radiation therapy, chemotherapies.
Yeah, trials are coming out more of using the intravenous vitamin C. So after like the intravenous vitamin C is revisited, there are multiple, more than dozens of trials, or are small scale. There's no like big scale phase 2 or phase 3 yet. Most of them found synergistic or like better effect if you combine with chemotherapy or radiation therapy in many cancers, lung, ovarian, pancreas, and then brain tumor as well. Especially there's a group in Iowa, our Iowa University of Iowa friends. They recently had a non-small cell lung cancer trial published, I think. They found, yes, adding high dose intravenous vitamin C enhance the radiotherapy effects and the chemotherapy effects. And then they also argue for some of their biomarker parameters, they also argue that vitamin C might modulate the immune response in cancer, which may enhance the immunotherapy effects. But that is to be tested in people.
Great.
And certainly there's likely some chemotherapies that should not be mixed with IV vitamin C. Is that also the case?
Methotrexate, I think, is the only one, and that has to do again with the pH of the urine. It's a more of a biologic problem rather than a actual negating the effect of the chemotherapy.
Okay.
But I want to add something that I thought of. There are some practitioners that are using glutathione with IV vitamin C in cancer patients. And we're trying to give an oxidative burst, excuse me. And the glutathione is actually a very powerful antioxidant. And they're mixing it in the bag with the vitamin C, or they're giving it immediately after the IV vitamin C and chemotherapy. And that should be warned against. Kay and I did a small animal trial showing that that it does, in fact, reduce the effectiveness of the vitamin C when the glutathione is added.
Yes, it goes back to what's in the bag a little bit. You know, the chemistry that we all observe in test tubes and cell culture can actually happen in that bag if you're adding a bunch of things in there. And so you may not be getting the vitamin C dose you're thinking you're getting at that point. I guess there was a couple questions here about when you should, how do I put this, almost contraindications, like when you should not get IV vitamin C, or are there certain diseases or conditions that someone might have and it may not be a good idea for them to get IV?
I can answer that in one way. Patients that have either an inherited predisposition to oxalate kidney stones or have had a history of oxalate kidney stones should probably not get intravenous vitamin C.
And also the glucose-6 dehydrogenase deficiency, that should avoid high dose of intravenous vitamin C, because that goes to the risk of intravascular hemolysis, which can be pretty serious.
Yeah.
So yeah, G6PD deficiency should avoid high dose vitamin C.
There are also quite a few questions here in terms of how do people find practitioners that I guess a general question, where are we in terms of use of IV vitamin C? Is it just in clinical trials? Is it becoming more mainstream? And then if it is something that someone can do outside a trial, how do people find the practitioners that you just talked about that have the values and the knowledge that you're talking about?
Well, it is certainly growing. It's been in the clinic in use for a very long time, since the 40s, actually, and a lot of people aren't aware of that. But it's certainly gained in popularity recently. And you've got everything from a trained practitioner to a van that will give you an IV if you have a hangover. So there's a lot of variety here. But a trained practitioner, they can be trained in their fellowships. We trained doctors in our fellowship program when it was open to give IV vitamin C correctly. There's also naturopathic doctors that are trained in their medical school, and there are doctors that learn it from organizations. So the American Association of Naturopathic Physicians is one source. An organization called ACAM, ACAM.org, is another resource to find a trained practitioner. Some of the functional medicine doctors are now trained in giving intravenous vitamin C. So that's Institute for Functional Medicine. So there's a number of organizations currently that will give you a list of people that have been trained.
Oh, I didn't know you could get vitamin C out of a van.
Yes.
Well.
In fact, there was just an article in the Washington Post 2 days ago about how, this is turning into it's kind of a circus, and they were advocating not to do that any longer.
Yeah, I think as you mentioned, as Kay mentioned, the G6PD deficiency. I mean, that's something you have to screen for. You can't just
Oh my gosh,
popping vitamin C into anyone
no.
without doing some blood tests and
I
medical history.
actually helped someone defend themselves in New Jersey that had given someone IV vitamin C and had not checked the G6PD, and that patient ended up bleeding rather briskly
Ooh.
in their urine and bowel. And so, yeah, it's not a small thing being G6PD negative, not having the robust enzyme, so it's a concern.
Yeah. Okay. It's a perennial question. I'm just going to ask it because we always get questions about liposomal vitamin C. And so let's start with liposomal versus intravenous. Is it close? Can you get there? What ballpark are we in?
Go ahead, Kay.
Okay, so the reason intravenous vitamin C works in the trials while oral vitamin C, I mean, in like killing cancer cells, is the pharmacokinetics, means like how high you have a blood concentration, how long it lasts, how it behaves in the body. So the key is like you have that very high concentration as a treatment window for a couple of hours lasting in your body. So for that peak concentration there, the data I saw with liposomal vitamin C is no comparison for intravenous vitamin C, even if using the same dose. Yes, the liposomal vitamin C can enhance absorption, but to a limited level. So the data I saw is that they can reach about 300 or 500 micromolars, which is higher than like you take a vitamin C tablet or powder. But the intravenous can give you millimolars. That's totally a different level. So there's no comparison.
It's several log-fold difference.
Right.
So we really can't tell people, which a lot of people are putting out there, that says, take your liposomal vitamin C and you'll get the anti-cancer effects. I think that's just erroneous. I mean, it's false information.
It is false.
And so really there's not really a good, if you can't get IV vitamin C where you are, there's not really much anybody can do at that point. I mean, you just try to seek more practitioners with access to IV.
You do have to, you cannot take oral vitamin C and expect to get blood levels like intravenous vitamin C. There's just no comparison. And so, yes, if you want that effect, if you want the anti-cancer effect or the anti-infective effect, you really need to seek out somebody who's trained in giving intravenous vitamin C.
I think the surprising part about that is there's more and more people, as kind of Emily was alluding to with her question, more and more people have this available all the time. So it's actually growing in number. I found out my naturopathic doctor did it. So, okay, great. In case I need it. But there was a follow-up question that someone had about that organization where you could find practitioners. Jeannie, can you repeat that?
It's the American College for Advancement in Medicine, or ACAM.org.
Okay, ACAM.org. Okay, thank you.
Right.
You talked a little bit about Dr. Fowler's work with sepsis. Can you comment a little bit more in terms of place of IV vitamin C, especially in terms of enhancing immune function? Thinking about, there's been a lot of press around potentially use of IV vitamin C for COVID. Certainly a pressing topic right now.
You want to go ahead, Jeannie?
No, go ahead, Kay.
Okay. So there are evidence that vitamin C can modulate immune responses, especially in inflammation and then in infections. And then the exact mechanism of how vitamin C, like high dose intravenous vitamin C, can work in the infection or inflammation is actually quite complicated and not fully understand. So the argument for using vitamin C in sepsis and maybe COVID caused cytokine storm or the damage that COVID caused is like, first, those patients are low in their vitamin C level.
Yep.
So they are like depleted. There are some data showing like they are close to scurvy level in their blood. And then second, there are evidence showing that vitamin C vitamin C is a core enzyme, a core factor for many enzymes in the immune cells. The immune cells usually normally have like very high vitamin C accumulated in them. So the core factors of importance is the HIF, hypoxia-induced factor, is one of them. And then the other one important is PET, which is a DNA demethylase, which modulates the DNA, the epigenetic modification of the DNA. So what is important of like these two factors are in the immune function. They are related to mating of the T cell macrophage differentiation, like from the bone marrow cell, how they differentiate into a matured T cell, B cell macrophage and stuff. And then also in the chemotaxis, in the neutrophil phagocytosis, meaning these enzymes are important in many of the immune functions of the cell. So that's another possibility. And then the third one is vitamin C. They're depleted, and then you give them back could protect, could work as an antioxidant there to protect the damage caused by ROS. And then there are actually, if you mention COVID-19, there are probably 5 trials published now. They found that anywhere from like 6 grams to 24 grams a day, they can reduce the inflammatory markers. Many inflammatory markers are reduced in those patients. And then they have better oxygenation parameters using those ICU, clinically ill patients. And then they have stays in their hospitals shorter. And then they have the mortality, ICU mortality better. Those trials are done in China, in Iran, Pakistan, and Italy, I think. Unfortunately, there's none in the US have published yet. There's one coming out, not yet. So that's the current status. And there are also like retrospective controlled trials of using those 4 or 5 are like they're controlled trials, either vitamin C or no vitamin C standard care, vitamin C plus standard care controlled trials. There are retrospective trials also, more of them, a few more of them. They also find some benefit. They also find benefit of using vitamin C by reducing mortality, especially in the more critically ill patients.
In this case, the IV vitamin C is really a mode of being able to replenish vitamin C levels that have dropped and causing the cytokine, rather than a treatment per se, killing off the COVID. Is that my understanding?
That is hard to say because the detailed mechanism is not clear. That might be like multi-facets there, multi-mechanism working. One is like the replenish of the vitamin C level, so the immune system works, like is boosted, works more normal, and then reduce the inflammation. The other might be the same as in cancer, like the hydrogen peroxide formed, and that can deactivate the virus. Actually, we had 2 cases. These are cases, not trials. Okay, of critically, you just published last a few days ago, 3 days ago. So two critically ill COVID-19 patients they are cancer patients. They have active cancer and they get COVID, so they become critically ill, and then they are like fast declining. And as the last resort, the doctors give vitamin C 12 grams in the morning, 12 grams in the evening, so 24 grams per day. And then only after they add the high dose vitamin C did they see the inflammatory markers drop down. And then the oxygenation is improved and patient is stabilized, and eventually they get out of the ICU. But other than that, before they give the IV, although one of the patients had 500 milligrams of oral as her standard care, plus all the antiviral, antimicrobial treatment and the supportive care there, did not improve until the high dose IV vitamin C is getting in. So although these are only two cases, I think it's pretty encouraging evidence.
Yeah, literally hot off the presses.
Yeah, and also, their SARS-CoV-2 virus test turned negative after 7 days of vitamin C course. So there could be a direct inactivation of virus. Also, it's just we need to do more research to detail out the mechanism.
Yeah, that's a hard one to say because, I mean, obviously these trials, they're not looking to monitor blood levels of vitamin C during, critically ill patients. So we don't exactly know what concentrations they're reaching during most of these studies. They just administer and hope for the best. But yes, I should note that to everyone in the audience that the trials that Dr. Chen is talking about are all intravenous vitamin C. There are some trials being done on oral, but they certainly haven't shown any of the same results that intravenous vitamin C has. In fact, we're currently working on summarizing all that information for our research newsletter for the Linus Pauling Institute. So the oral and intravenous are just kind of two different worlds, and it's important to note that we can't necessarily replicate the same effects on COVID with oral. And as Dr. Chen said, one of the patients was already taking oral vitamin C, and it just wasn't doing enough.
But I have to emphasize that is a very critically ill patient. There are some reports showing that high dose oral vitamin C in more mild or symptomed patients, they should benefit. But I found that those evidence are not so rigorous as the ones that did in the trial. So
you can probably say that about the majority of vitamin C research. It's not very rigorous, but that's a side comment.
Another follow-up I wanted to have. So in terms of chicken or the egg, when it comes to infection, it sounds like, or critically ill, whether or not it's the infection that causes the low vitamin C, or is it the vitamin C that's causing the predisposition to infection?
That's a wonderful question. Certainly the infection will rapidly deplete the body of the vitamin C stores, such that they are, into the near scurvy or scurvy levels. So definitely a critically ill state can do that. But then you also say, well, what happens if someone is not eating very well and doesn't take a vitamin C supplement? Then their vitamin C levels are low. Yes. Are they more predisposed? It's probably both, Emily.
I actually think this is where we're going to have to wrap things up. I just realized the time. It's already noon, or almost noon. I think I want to do a quick thank you to both Dr. Chen and Dr. Drisco. I got a shout out from members of the audience. Several people have said thank you for speaking with us. Michael Gonzalez, as you
my good friend, yes.
And we have a couple other ringers in the audience when it comes to vitamin C researchers. So yes, thank you both for coming out here today and answering these questions. I'm sorry we weren't able to get to majority of them.
Definitely a hot topic. Yeah, and I'd like to echo just a huge thank you for your lending us your expertise, lending us your time. And thanks everyone in the audience for your great questions as well. As mentioned, we'll have additional resources for you in terms of that FAQ, links to this talk if you want to revisit it. We've got other things on the LPI website. It's one of the reasons that we do events like this, to make sure that you have answers that you need on important topics around your health. So this is our first webinar series for 2022. We love to kick it off with Linus Pauling Day. Just an FYI, our next webinar is scheduled for April 21st. The topic will be trout, mice, and rats. And humans all agree Brussels sprouts prevent cancer. And we will have our own Dr. David Williams, who's one of our investigators at the Institute, and also an OSU distinguished professor who's going to come talk about cruciferous vegetables and Brussels sprouts and cancer impact. So hope you can join us there. We'll send a registration link in the chat, and you'll get that information as well.
And that's actually our Damn Proud Day webinar there, Emily. So Oregon State University has an annual day of giving called Damn Proud Day. But Emily will say more about that in just a moment. As Emily mentioned before, these events are only possible with generous support of LPI donors. If you appreciate these events, please consider donating to the Institute. Any amount that you give today or in the future will help try to bring more of these events to you coming later this year, even.
Yeah, so Damn Proud Day is a Oregon State Day of Giving. For those who might not know, the beavers are our national treasure, both in the state and at the university. So April 27th, we'll have a Day of Giving, and the Linus Pauling Institute will be raising money for the Simone and Balls Fry Endowed Graduate Fellowship, as well as the Micronutrient Information Center, which we've talked about quite a bit here. So love to have all of you involved in Damn Proud Day, make it a success, bring new donations to the Institute, and again, help us reach our mission in terms of science and outreach. You can become an ambassador for Damn Proud Day if you are interested in this, in terms of getting the word out on social media about what the Institute does. Contact us at lpi@oregonstate.edu. Love to hear from you regardless. Use that email anytime to send us questions, comments, and again, love to hear from you.
And with that, I think we're drawing our Linus Pauling Day webinar to a close. Obviously, we didn't get to all the questions today, but we are saving them all, and we will try to get to them as we did our questions from the last webinar. And everyone who's registered today will get a copy of those questions from last year's webinar and the link to this video. On behalf of everyone at the Linus Pauling Institute, I'd like to send a big thank you to our invited speakers, Dr. Jeannie Drisco and Dr. Chen. Thank you for coming out and talking with us today. We appreciate hearing everything about your work.
It was a lot of fun. Thank you.
So great to see you guys both, and amazing research that you both are doing, and keep it up. And I'm sure we'll have you back again.
Thank you, Emily.
Bye-bye.
So everyone in the audience, thank you for spending some time with us. Eat some oranges for Linus Pauling today. Hope you learned a little bit more about vitamin C in your health, and we'll see you in April. Thank you.
Happy Linus Pauling Day.
Bye-bye.